committee for September the 14th. Clerks, can we get a roll call just to confirm quorum, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Councillor Wong. Councillor Chu.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Dhaliwal.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Pootmans.
Here.
Councillor Walcott.
I'm in the building.
Councillor Corral.
I am here.
Thank you. Councillor Sharp. Councillor White-Ness. Councillor Meehan.
I'm here.
Councillor Chabot.
Online.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor McLean.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Demong. Mayor Gondek. Chair Penner.
I am here.
Thank you.
We do have quorum, and I am sure other members will be joining us throughout the rest of the afternoon. We are going to resume the public portion. I'm going to call two names that I've called before that weren't here. Alyssa Youngins, you happen to be in the audience, and Mohammed Lada. Okay, I will call them again later. Okay, so we are moving on to panel 4. So Jennifer Kremenik, Inam Teja, Lee Stevens, Andrea Cox, and Lei Wang. If you can all go over to that side, perfect. And then on panel 5, who will be up next? They may not all be back yet. Teresa Goldstein, Nathan Hawryluk, Susan Gwynn, Emma MacIsaac, and Jordan Lindsay. Okay, so first up in panel 4 is Jennifer Kremenik.
My name is Jennifer Kremenik. I am the founder and executive director of Harvest Hills Cares Calgary. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak about an important issue that's affecting Calgarians, which is the housing crisis. This particular housing crisis has steadily been worsening over the past few years, and it's imperative that we collectively take action to address it. Alberta, as we all know, is known for its abundant resources, strong economy, and high quality of life. Calgary is known for its vibrant economy, stunning landscapes, and strong sense of community. But beneath it all lies a growing problem that threatens every Calgarian. People in Calgary are grappling with the harsh reality of housing unaffordability, housing instability, and homelessness. The housing crisis in Calgary has left over 84,000 individuals, families, and seniors struggling to find affordable and stable housing. One of the pressing issues is the escalating cost of said housing. As a result, many Albertans find themselves struggling to enter the housing market, while those who already own homes face ever-increasing property taxes and maintenance costs. The demand for housing in Calgary has surged. A severe shortage of affordable housing options simply exacerbates the problem at hand. Renters in Calgary often face steep rent increases, evictions, rent-evictions, and poor living conditions. Many residents in Calgary, especially those with low incomes, have been forced into a cycle of housing instability, making it difficult for them to access vital resources. With unemployment rates rising, not falling, more people are finding themselves unable to pay rent or mortgage payments, which that in turn puts everyone at risk of homelessness. Income inequality in Alberta has widened and job security has become a common concern. This leaves many Albertans, many Calgarians teetering on the brink of homelessness as they struggle to meet their basic needs during this housing crisis. Vulnerable populations, including Indigenous communities, refugees, and those with mental health challenges are disproportionately affected by the housing crisis. Not to mention the huge lack of access to safe and affordable housing, which perpetuates the many cycles of poverty, inequality, and social exclusion. So what can we do to address this crisis? We can, 1, invest in affordable housing, which can be achieved through government and city incentives for builders, zoning changes, and could include collaborating with both provincial and federal governments, together with nonprofit organizations, charities, and local groups to fund the construction of affordable housing units and renovation of existing ones. We can implement rent control and tenant protections. By doing this, we can stabilize housing costs, prevent unjust rent increases, and provide more stability for renters. Earlier this afternoon, I received a phone call from a senior whose rent went up $1,800 from $675. That's how bad this crisis is. And I apologize if I'm getting emotional, but we are tapped out. And this senior is using 80% of her income to pay rent. And we've been covering her medications for 3 months. We've been giving food hampers monthly, and we're only supposed to help once every 6 months. We need to bring forth more social services and mental health supports. By expanding access to these supports that can assist vulnerable populations in securing housing and addressing underlying issues that contribute to the homelessness. Promoting mixed income neighborhoods and encouraging the development of mixed income areas in order to reduce segregation and create more inclusive communities. This is something that needs to happen even more than it already does in Calgary. We all have a role to play in advocating for change. In conclusion, the housing crisis here in Calgary and throughout Alberta is not an issue that can be ignored any longer. It affects the very fabric of our community and the lives of our fellow Calgarians. Let's make sure that everyone in Calgary has access to safe, affordable, and stable housing, because a thriving community and a thriving city and a thriving province is one where everyone has a place to call home. Finally, I would like to touch upon and remember my friend V. Duncan. He's the Indigenous gentleman who pushed a shopping cart from here, City Hall, to Edmonton. He was a warrior for the voiceless, and when he pushed that shopping cart, he brought awareness to Indigenous homelessness. He started a movement. V's movement became NECM, which means to change something, and to change something he did. V accomplished so much and has helped so many. The outreach and nonprofit organization community has lost a bright and brilliant mind. He will be greatly missed. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jennifer, for your presentation today. Inam Teja, you are next.
Hi, Council. My name is Inam Teja, and I'm speaking to you today in support of the Calgary Housing Strategy. I will disclose that I'm the Vice President of the Coach Hill Patterson Heights Community Association, and I work as a Policy and Advocacy Specialist at the Drop-In Centre. But today I come before you not in those roles, but as a private citizen with a master's degree and a good-paying job who lives in his parents' basement because of the housing affordability crisis. As a young person, I've been living on my own outside of Calgary for the last few years. And it's been quite tough moving back to my hometown and realizing that my only chance to get on the property ladder is by living in my parents' home and saving up, likely for many years. In my work, I spend every day thinking about housing others, and when I come home, I have to spend my time thinking about housing myself. And all these thinking has led me to 3 key considerations that I would ask each councillor keep in mind as they make their decisions. The first consideration is consider the rights of Calgarians who are seeking housing, not just the desires of those with housing already. There have been many arguments floated around about the importance of democracy in the process of building new houses. Many argue in favor of having approval processes for zoning changes that give community members influence and often de facto veto over decisions. While I'm a big believer in community engagement, I worry that the voices that are represented rarely include those seeking housing, but they almost always include those who already have it. Housing is a universal human right, which is far more consequential than any right to dictate what type of buildings exist near one's property. We are at the point where housing is so scarce that you and every level of government need to consider it a human rights issue and need to act accordingly. The second thing to consider, please weigh the second-order effects of unserious action. I trust that Council has put much thought into thinking through the consequences of any plan in front of you, but I also want you to consider the dire consequences of not doing enough. I'm sure you've heard much about the economic costs of sprawl, and you will hear more about the environmental consequences of our current approach. But I want to highlight a worsening trend that is close to my heart. I'm very worried about the rising rhetoric blaming immigrants and refugees for this crisis. It is well documented that a healthy stream of newcomers is part of what makes Calgary a thriving, vibrant city. However, our housing crisis has some blaming newcomers for the increased demand in housing. And this rising anti-newcomer rhetoric inevitably comes with the hate and violence that is very perturbing to me as the son of a refugee. The status quo isn't static. It is continuing to decay our sense of community. And the third thing I want you all to keep in mind is to not let perfect become the enemy of good. I realize that this strategy is not perfect. It's going to take a lot of time and energy and resources to implement. It will require buy-in from other levels of government, and I'm sure that the intense scrutiny on this issue means that none of you are going to go home to your community and have everyone happy at you. I personally think that the strategy could do more to address underutilized private lands and perhaps advocate for more tenant protections. But at the end of the day, we must not let our own versions of perfect become the enemies of good policy. Putting on my public policy hat, this strategy is a very good start. It may not be detailed yet, but it is very thorough. These recommendations are well-reasoned and data-driven and generally proven to work in similar jurisdictions. And I've chatted with quite a few of you around the table, and earlier this month, one of the councillors mentioned to me that my parents and grandparents might not agree with my support for scrapping parking minimums and my support for RCG zoning. But I can assure you that my parents will support any plan that helps me move off of the basement couch in time for the Flames season opener. Right now, we live in a city where the status quo is spiraling quickly and hesitations and half measures are inadequate. So as one of many Calgarians seeking a home, I hope I can count on you all to consider the rights of those seeking housing, to weigh the consequences of unserious action, and to not let perfect become the enemy of good policy. I'd be happy to elaborate on any of these if anyone has any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Inam. Lee.
Hi everyone, my name is Lee Stevens and I'm here representing Vibrant Communities Calgary. We are the stewards of Calgary's poverty reduction strategy, Enough for All. We have recently become aware of a new statistic based on research from the School of Public Policy to estimate the number of Calgarians at risk of homelessness. Right now, 100,000 Calgarians are at extreme risk of homelessness. The number we stated in our submission was an underestimation, and we have since received new information from the authors. These are people who have minimized their rent by crowding, they're heavily reliant on the food bank, and they've reduced their spending substantially on other goods and services. This means a job loss, a sickness, or another emergency could land them in our overburdened and exhausted homeless serving system of care. These are our friends, our neighbors, and our family. Last week, I heard a story from a 26-year-old student. She balances full-time studies with a job. She's currently living in unsafe accommodations. She's been trying to move, but she goes to showings and never gets picked by the landlord. Another story we heard is about a mother and her adult son, both newcomers. Their rent went up by almost $500 last month, and they don't know how they're going to cope. We've been banging the drum on affordable housing for years, but this year is different. We've been hearing the stories daily of landlords raising rents far above inflation at 15%, 20%, 30%. More and more people can't purchase a home, making rentals even more scarce. We need to step up. Every order of government must play its part in addressing the housing crisis. And now, Calgary, it's our turn. We must come to terms with the fact that compared to other major cities, we have very little low-cost housing on a per capita basis. And our recent population boom has only exacerbated this issue. We're witnessing record people moving to Calgary, and right now we're setting them up for failure. Approving these recommendations and approving the housing strategy would remove barriers, make it easier for developers to build more rentals, reduce rental costs, and stop many people from becoming homeless in the future. Our housing crisis demands immediate action. Decision makers, I urge you to vote yes to the housing strategy and bring us closer to being the city where everyone has a safe, stable, and affordable place to call home, a city where there is enough for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Andrea.
Hello, my name is Andrea Cox, and I'm speaking to you today on behalf of YWCA Calgary. We're the longest serving women's organization in the city. And in fact, it's been since 1910 that YW has been helping women find safe, appropriate, and affordable housing in the city. So we've been doing this for a long time, and it's certainly never been simple, but over the past year, we've seen a shift where no matter who we're working with or what their income levels are, helping our clients find appropriate housing has gone from being a challenge to being a true crisis. Here are a few examples of what some of YW's clients have faced in the past year. One client has attended over 100 apartment viewings in person, and I'd like you to just imagine the amount of time it takes to set up and physically attend those viewings. And once a viewing is secured, our clients tend to be competing against at least 20 other people to be selected as a tenant in each location. Sadly, this particular client still has not yet found housing. We have had a client who's had a great, steady job in the city choose the uncertainty of moving to another city altogether after months of struggling to find housing in Calgary. We have seen women who have left their abusive partners and made that courageous decision have to take on second jobs in order to be able to afford rent for them and their children on a single income. Of course, obtaining a second job is not always going to be possible. Devastatingly, we have had other clients who have returned to their abusive partners specifically out of the fear of not being able to afford rent without them. We have seen single moms who have had their children taken out of their custody as a result of no longer being able to afford appropriate housing. There are so few apartments available that our clients increasingly see discriminatory behaviors from landlords. This includes landlords refusing to give out a rental application once they find out that one of our clients is on income supports. It also means some clients have been invited to in-person viewings by email, only to be completely disregarded or dismissed by the property manager upon arrival. They leave wondering if they've been discriminated against for their race, or if they've been discriminated against for having multiple children, which we see frequently. Some actions by landlords are technically legal, but of course make the affordability crisis worse. Increasingly, we are seeing landlords charging a non-refundable $50 fee just to view an apartment. Some of our middle-income clients who use YW's services are experiencing extreme stress and duress after receiving notice that their rent will almost double if they choose to re-sign their lease, and that is just a de facto eviction. We cannot stress enough that the status quo is truly untenable. People's safety, security, and overall well-being are at risk. Action is needed, and YW urges Council to move forward with the housing strategy as an important first step. We completely understand that the city alone cannot solve this issue, and YW will continue to advocate to all orders of government to simultaneously work on bold and creative solutions like the ones that your amazing public service has come up with to create this strategy. And of course, we offer to work in partnership with the nonprofit sector and with our partners in the private sector. To those who remain skeptical of minor points within the recommendations, I echo my peer who spoke before me. Please do not let the imagined perfect be the enemy of the good. There is simply not enough time to go back to the drawing board for further studies, evaluation, surveys, or debates. Calgarians need hope, they need action, and they need it right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. Lee.
Good afternoon, your chair, mayor, and councillors. My name is Lei Wang. I'm the owner of Horizon Land Service. To disclose, we currently have close to 40 land use amendment projects on the go. Most of these are corner lot RC2 to RCG, but we also have a few RC1 to RC2, HGO projects, and mixed-use applications at various stages of rezoning. There are doubts that because of this, we would be financially benefit to see the recommendations go through. To the contrary, if the recommendations go through, we will actually lose a big chunk of our business. But I'm speaking today for what I think would be good for this city and for our future generations. I can always find another business, but we only have one Calgary. I want to start with a bit of my own story, followed by reasons why I think the recommendations are good, and end with a few of my own humble suggestions. My wife and I came to Calgary 10 years ago with nothing in our pocket but job offers. My boss, whom I still work with, rent a hotel room for us so we can have a roof over our head. We later found a 2-bedroom apartment close to where we work. The rent is $750, and we can walk to our office every day. Although we have great boss and caring colleagues, the first few months are tough. A lot of snow, cold, roads slippery, and we are far away from our family. However, because our rent is affordable, we do not need to find a second job and can focus on passing the exams and have our foreign credentials certified here in Canada. When I look back, I feel it is very critical for me. At that time, our focus is to survive. 6 months later, because we do not have a lot of expense and our job is more stable, we found that we have 5% saved up towards our first house. It's a nice suburban house. We bought it for $300,000. I still remember the conversation I had with the realtor. When I get into the house, I just feel it's about 1,700 square foot. For that size, I already feel it's so big for me and my family. The mortgage is also well within what we can handle, so we can continue focus on sharpening our skills. We bought our first car. It was at that time we started to drive around the city, downtown, city parks, provincial parks, ski resorts, bicycle pathway, playgrounds, library, shopping malls, etc. We found this city is amazing and has everything we dreamed of. We fall in love with this city for its rich amenities, friendly people, and its openness. After our second kid was born and our first kid getting to school age, we found a nice place in southwest part of the city. I've been living there ever since. This is my little story. I believe every day there are many similar stories happening in this city. But the rising housing price and the rising rent are making this more and more challenging, if not totally impossible. I support the recommendation as it takes into consideration of all people and people in different stages of their life. Often when we sit in a nice backyard and look at the views of mountains, we remember that we fought hard and worked hard for it. But one thing we tend to forget is the environment and conditions that help us get to where we were. In my case, it is affordable rent and affordable housing that free me to pursue what I like. Our current rezoning process is long, costly, and involves a lot of uncertainty. Everyone recognizes we are in house crisis. However, during public engagement, the spirit we hear most often is not in my backyard. 4-unit row house development is always considered as discretionary use and still subject to public engagement. In my point of view, this is nothing to be feared of. The market will decide whether certain locations will make sense to build those. City as gatekeeper can also look at services, parking, transportation, shadowing, maximum height, perspective, and also how to strengthen those public engagement. Apart from those recommendations, I also would like to give my humble opinion. Our land use bylaw section 14.2a set up the rounding down rule. Basically, when density is calculated in units per hectares, it is always to be rounded down to the next lower whole number. So 4.9 units can only be 4 units. I believe this rule is very outdated and needs to be updated. With that, I conclude my presentation. I sincerely hope councillors can support the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. So those are those 5 speakers, and we do have questions from council. Councillor Craw, you are first. Councillor Craw, can you hear me? I'm going to come back to Councillor Craw. Just give him a second. Councillor Walcott, can I turn to you?
Absolutely. I had a question for Lee Stevens, because we got our 2 Lees here. I really appreciate that you came in and really emphasized the updating and the new information that's provided. Even in our own housing needs assessment, it was primarily collected based on census data from 2021.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we talk about this stuff, it's drastic, but it's also out of date already by nature of the time that we were in. And so you had mentioned that you had been working on this and analyzing this and advocating for so long for affordable housing in the city, but there's been a progressive escalation in need. And the data doesn't reflect it. And so I was kind of asking can you provide your personal perception of that escalation? Because it'll probably take another 2 years before we find out how bad 2023 actually is.
Are you referring to those at risk of homelessness or housing need?
If you were both, because both would fall under the Enough for All strategy, so yeah.
So the main factors sort of causing the increase, that's what you're asking? Ooh, combination. I mean, I think we've all said it here today. Affordability, of course. Wages and income are a big one, actually. Something that I didn't mention in my speech, but this is one of the reasons why we calculate the living wage every year, is to encourage employers to understand what it actually costs to live in this city. And then, of course, we do a lot of advocacy to the provincial government on income support. I'm personally very concerned about income security. I don't think our income support system is secure, is adequate. There's lots of issues there that need to be tackled, and I'm actually disappointed that they haven't been tackled, 3 years after the pandemic. So that's one. And then the lack of non-market housing stock is what really is concerning, and especially deeply subsidized housing is something that there's even more of a shortage on. So me personally, I would love to see a priority for deeply subsidized housing. Yeah.
Just for the public in the audience, because we talk about non-market housing as it's a big bucket.
Yeah.
Can you just go into a little bit more specifics about the difference between what we would normally assume non-market housing is and what deep subsidy housing is? And
Yes.
So that people understand the pricing especially.
Sure. Yeah, so deeply subsidized housing is housing that's around $500 a month. And what's interesting is I did a homelessness study tour in New York just this past spring, and we actually toured a permanent supportive housing facility in Manhattan, and they offer rents that are between like $300 and $400 and $500 a month, which is actually amazing. So if a city like Manhattan can offer housing at that cheap, it's definitely possible for us to do it here in Calgary.
Absolutely.
And across Alberta, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Councillor Carra, back to you. Or not. Councillor Carra, make sure you're unmuted. All right. All right. Great questions, Councillor Carra. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Councillor Carra is here. I apologize.
All right. Go ahead, Councillor Carra.
Thank you. This is a question. Actually, I have two questions for Mr. Teja, if he could make his way back to the mic.
He's there. Go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation. I got my first question to you has to do with your statement that the status quo is not static. I think we heard a little bit of a preview of coming attractions from the Center for Newcomers, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on exactly what that means.
Yeah, sure. So I think what I'm trying to highlight with that statement is that, we're not just in a housing crisis, we're in a housing crisis that is getting worse every single day. We often think and hear about these kind of first order effects of the housing crisis, people not having shelter, people at risk of homelessness. But I think it's really important to recognize that all these things come with second order effects. So I mentioned earlier the rising anti-immigrant, anti-newcomer rhetoric that we've been hearing. That's of much concern to me. We've also seen other trends that I think are really related to this. the rise in pet abandonments because we don't see as many rental units available that are pet friendly, especially after the kind of jump in pet ownership during the pandemic. What we're seeing in our pet shelters is truly tragic, and it's really linked to this housing affordability crisis. As someone who works in the homeless serving sector, we can really see the numbers in terms of shelter usage, and I'm sure I'll have some of my colleagues speaking later on that. We also see kind of trends around the power balance shifting between landlords and tenants. Because there are now plenty of tenants to go around, landlords can easily go and say, oh, I don't like XYZ about this tenant, I'll find a replacement, right? Or oh, I can now charge $50 for an application fee for my building. Or things like rent discrimination we'll see a rise in. We'll see, and we are seeing a lot of these things where we feel like as renters the power balance has really shifted, and there's not an option to leave anymore. It's almost become akin to like a monopoly or oligopoly situation where the supply and demand don't match up, and so the power balance is totally skewed. And another kind of effect, I think, that's worsening because this status quo is not static, is there's less vacancies and less opportunities for landlords to actually upgrade housing, right? It's now you're having tenants who are desperate to stay in their current housing situations. You're not seeing as much, turnover, and so I worry that we'll be seeing a decrease in the ability to upgrade current housing because all of our funds are needed elsewhere. And so if we don't get ahead of these trends, we're going to have, we already do have a shortage in labor in the construction industry, but we need to be making sure that this labor is also available for environmental retrofits and everything. And so we really need to get started on tackling this crisis because every single day it's getting worse.
Thank you for that. Status quo not being static. All good points. Mr. Teja, I had the honor of being an interviewee when you were doing your master's research, so I know that your public policy degree is both housing focused and is able to juxtapose sort of a British context with a Canadian context a little bit. I was wondering if you might want to weigh in a little bit on the letter that we just received from the housing minister and the conversation that we're having about upzoning to a base RG throughout the city.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So when we're talking about our zoning changes, what people are calling blanket upzoning, I can tell you there's quite a few reasons to be in support of them. And the first one off the bat is the letter that the Minister of Housing federally, Sean Fraser, has sent today, where they're talking about the conditions on the Housing Accelerator Fund, essentially issuing the statement that if council today or this weekend doesn't pass the ability to get started on these upzoning changes, that may render council ineligible for receiving these funds from the Housing Accelerator Fund. And so when we have the federal government offering what I assume to be hundreds of millions of dollars through this fund based on what's been offered to London, Ontario, a much smaller city, and we have the opportunity to say, yes, we're going to change this zoning and receive hundreds of millions of dollars that'll help Calgarians, it seems like a bit of a no-brainer to me. And not to mention the other benefits that come with upzoning. People have talked about the ability to provide variety in neighborhoods that are just R1 zoned. I'd like to be able to live close to my parents' place, but almost all the housing around there is simply the single detached homes that I would never be able to afford. And we talk about, I think the city's number is that about 750 net new units per year made available through some of these zoning changes. And that may seem like a drop in the bucket to some people, but that's 750 people who who we can prevent from ending up in shelter, whose lives can be dramatically improved with this availability. And you know, thinking about zoning from a more philosophical and rights-based perspective, and you know, I'm a strong believer in private property rights. And private property rights should mean that when I have a parcel of land, I should be able to build what I want on that land. And yeah, I should be a considerate neighbor about that, and I should make sure that it fits within the context of what I'm building. But I shouldn't have neighbors issuing de facto vetoes and having tied up in all this red tape, you know, with my private property rights. And so, you know, those are a few things that come to my mind when I think about the importance of upzoning in our city.
Thank you for your thoughts. Madam Chair, I have no further questions.
Great. Thank you. I didn't mean to be like, great, you have no more questions. Sorry about that. Council Prumans.
For Mr. Teja, please. Thank you for joining us this morning. Councillor Carraw's comments about working with you on your thesis reminded me of our interview, actually. And we discussed at length your involvement in the Coach Hill Community Association area, and I live, as you know, nearby. And I'm wondering if you would care to comment. You opened the door for this question, so it's not too personal, I hope. Your own household is interested in your fate as a person living in the basement. Could you comment on surrounding in your neighborhood? I know some of your neighbors are adamantly against this zoning, and I'm wondering if you could comment on why is this feeling out there? Your perceptive views on this issue would be interesting.
Yeah, it's a tough one, you know. Anytime you seek to change something, you're gonna have opposition, and you know, people particularly in our neighborhood live very comfortable lives and then generally quite happy with the status quo. And I think that you know, that leads to a certain level of inertia. And you know, there are things that if you kind of told me, oh, my neighborhood was changing tomorrow, I'd be scared, I'd be concerned, and you know, I'd want to express that. But I think that the answer to those fears and those concerns should lie in an analysis of not just the fears and concerns of those with housing, but also the fears and concerns of those seeking housing. And I think sometimes the voices that come to the forefront tend to be those who already have the privilege and the power, and tend to be those who kind of have this comfort with what's happening right now, and maybe aren't exposed necessarily to the issues of those who are seeking housing.
Thank you. Very succinct. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Meehan.
Thanks. My question is for Lee Stevens. Thanks so much for being here and for all the work that you do. I think sometimes when we're on this side of the table, we will hear from folks who, you know, maybe have, like was just mentioned, a comfortable life, and they don't see how poverty in our society necessarily affects them. And so as someone who works very closely in this space, can you talk about how we're all actually affected by that?
Absolutely.
Maybe some of the unseen ways that we don't think about.
Well, in 2012, we published a cost of poverty report where we found out that poverty costs Alberta about $9.5 billion annually. So there's definitely an economic, so that does affect all of us, I think, right there. And of course, all the other presentations who talked about, you know, attracting tradespeople. You know, how are we going to attract tradespeople? There's nowhere for them to live, or healthcare workers, to take care of our seniors, and healthcare aides, and early learning and childcare developers. There are lots of skills that we need in this city, and it's important that they can find a place to live and have a livable income.
Thanks.
Yeah.
That's it.
I just have one question, actually, Lee Stevens, for you. Can you, and maybe we don't have that updated number yet, the living wage for 2022, can you remind us what that was?
$22.40 an hour. Whoop. Yeah, we haven't published our newest one yet. In November, we publish a new
In November. Any early indicators?
I mean, It's probably going to increase, but I don't want to speculate how much. I'm not deeply involved in those calculations anymore. We have a standardized online calculator that was created with the Alberta Living Wage Network, so I'm not sure, but I would guess it probably has increased, yeah.
So $22.40 or more an hour.
Yep.
Okay, good to know. Thank you so much. There are no other questions. Oh, Councillor Wong snuck in there. Go ahead, Councillor Wong.
Thank you. So, Stevens, just only because you answered that question, when you calculate 2241 and whatever the new rate is going to be, does it really provide people quality housing, quality life?
Yeah, it's a conservative estimate. Yeah, so I think we look at, without getting too complicated, the official poverty measure is the market basket measure, and so Statistics Canada creates baskets of items that you need. So we do use calculations from some of those numbers. So it is higher than the poverty line. The living wage is higher than the poverty line, but it also accounts for things like savings, being able to buy your kid a birthday present. If you're living at the poverty line, you don't have money for any of those things. So the living wage is a bit different. Yep. So yes, you're living a very modest lifestyle, but yeah.
Okay, now it's in a family situation, two income earners, 2241 times 2, is that still sufficient given you may have 1 or 2 kids or pet and that sort of thing?
Yeah, the living wage number is based on the family of 4, and assuming that both parents work full-time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this panel for all being here with us today. We are going to move on to panel 5. So panel 5, as you make your way down, Teresa Goldstein, Nathan Hawryluk, Susan Gwynn, Emma MacIsaac, and Jordan Lindsay. Those in panel 6, just so you are ready, is Willem Klumpenhouwer, Kathryn Davies, Hazen Ellwood, Hanita Simard, and David Barrett. You will be panel 6, so you're the next panel. Teresa, you are first on this panel, so you may join us at the podium. We'll just let everyone get settled. Good stuff, go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members of committee, Mayor. My name is Teresa Goldstein, and today I'm here as a citizen of Calgary, but I was a member of the Housing Affordability Task Force. I'm a staunch urbanist, a housing advocate, a lover of Calgary. In preparation for today, I probably wrote this speech 5 times. I wrote it in my head 10 times, and I was trying to figure out what exactly I wanted to talk to you about. What I first began is that my own family 3.5 years ago had to decide on our own finances and housing because we had a multi-generational housing crisis where my parents needed to relocate. And so housing to me felt like it was really personal. I don't want to talk about that today. I want to talk about governance, and I want to talk about the journey of housing. In 2016, in my role at the time, I stood right here, or over there at the counter, with the newly created corporate affordable housing strategy in my hand. And at that time, Council declared that housing affordability was a priority of Calgarians. At that time, you directed us to go away and create a series of programs and different implementation tools to create more housing programs and land available for sale. This is no different from where we are today. The recommendations before you are very simple. The task force had put together very plain language and very attainable language in there to make sure that it was simple. It's literally building on existing programs that are already working. I want to tell you a really good example of what's working. The non-market land disposition policy, which is a lot of words, but most of it is contained within your recommendation 1. This is the idea of taking city-owned surplus land and converting it into more housing. This program worked. In fact, it worked so well that the task force said, we need to do this more, and we need to do this everywhere across the city. In 2016, for those of you that were around this table, you might remember that this was a huge conversation and a very different approach to using land. It was saying that land was our asset to housing instead of maximizing the profit for sale. It was well-researched, low risk, and high reward. And as we saw yesterday, even 45 new homes were opened in Seton. Downtown, old parking lots were converted to hundreds of homes. 36th Street, where a transit was planned and no longer was going to go. Habitat for Humanity, Home Space, Homes for Heroes created hundreds of homes in Saddle Ridge and Seton, et cetera, et cetera. It was a win-win. Existing land, increasing supply, administrative functions streamlined. The point is, Council, we've gone down this path before. It was going to be different, but you said yes. We need to do something different. And communities were going to see some pretty big changes, and you said yes. We know that, and this is worth it because this is a priority. The city as a landowner was deciding that there was something different that they had envisioned on their own land and that they wanted to do something that benefited their priorities that they hadn't anticipated when they had first put this land away. This is how cities grow and evolve over time. Think about this as the same approach that's before you today. You're talking about the future of our city. This is the balance between today and the future. And this is exactly what keeps me up at night. I'm sure it keeps you up at night as well. Seeing the results of policy in action also doesn't have to take a long time. The report before you, actually most of the recommendations say now because they're very easily implemented. I'm going to finish by telling you very, very briefly a story. And this is about a fight that's worth fighting, the fight for housing. I grew up on a street that I deeply loved, a neighborhood that I loved, and a community that grew together, a community that was excited when we saw new families joining it, and when my friend's duplex was converted to a corner store with an apartment above. This feeling of collectiveness that I just painted in your brains is what people talk about when we think about change. They describe their street and their community. They don't describe their housing forms. It's not about the housing forms, remember? This is about people. This is about housing more people. And for the next 3 days, you're going to hear a lot about these stories, the stories of people and their point of view, and about the difference that housing makes. The strategy, the recommendations are not perfect. We heard and talked about that today. But either was that strategy, dare I say, in 2016. We learned a lot about that over time. Housing affordability is our competitive advantage in Canada. I know you can understand. This is worth fighting for. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Nathan, you are next.
Good afternoon. My name is Nathan Hawryluk. I'm on the Planning Commission, but I'm speaking for myself. I have some slides. Yes, there they are. Beautiful. Please vote for the housing strategy in full. I feel for you. I've sat there and voted on applications that I don't love. But let me tell you what I see at CPC. 1, I see a need to increase the supply and supply elasticity of housing in every submarket without displacing people. We need all kinds of homes, market, non-market, subsidized, units, suites. We'll need more builders. Every house flipper should be able to add homes by right. As we add homes, we need stability so we don't displace people who rent. It's easy to ask the province to enforce and improve tenant protections, including rent control, anti-gouging laws. Council can avoid displacing renters by allowing homeowners to build more units and suites. Slide 2. Our rules prevent homes from being rebuilt. This is Kensington Manor. Neither the land use nor the ARP allowed it to be rebuilt by right. If institutional investors are drooling over Calgary, maybe it's because we're not planning for 1970, let alone 2070. Slide 3. Our rules delay homes. Last year, a development permit was approved for 100 homes and main floor commercial on Mission Road. The owners couldn't fill the main floor and wanted to put their office there, but they had to apply for a new land use because the direct control district didn't include the word office. One line delayed 100 homes by 1 year. Slide 4. Our parking requirements make people negotiate to build less parking, including above the future LRT station at Eau Claire. These negotiations drive up the cost and uncertainty of building homes. Smaller applicants can't afford to negotiate, so parking rules keep out new entrants and reduce competition. Slide 5. The city expects to have a $7.7 billion infrastructure gap by 2030. $5.5 billion of that is for what we already own. Yet, it appears that the city's board of directors spends more time debating low-density applications than sorting out our infrastructure gap. We have a tightly wound system that doesn't build enough houses at prices that people can afford. It also keeps us from meeting our municipal development plan and climate strategy goals. Since June's delay, I've kept some stats at commission. Slide 6. CPC has recommended 105 land use amendments with a maximum net increase of almost 8,200 units and suites. 19% of homes have been in the developed areas, 81% in the developing areas. That's a bit off from our 50-50 goal. Re-regulating for the outcomes that we say we want could help us get closer to our goals. Slide 7. Of those applications, 12% were for detached or semi-detached homes, and 31% were for row houses. Council considers 43% of those applications low density. I think those could be by right. Another 12% of those were for HCO applications that have clear council-approved locational criteria. In my opinion, admin could have spent less time writing reports and simply decided 56% of those land use changes. Slide 8. It's already been discussed. 14.2A, the worst line in the land use bylaw. Everybody has strong feelings about those. We round down on units, even when elementary school math would round up. That doesn't change the size of the building, just the number of families who could live there. Slide 9, let's put some numbers to that. Since June 6th, CPC has recommended 33 RCG applications. Unfortunately, 21 or 64% of those rounded down half units. The system removed 22 units and 22 suites, which could have housed another 68 to 72 people. That's one day's arrivals left in the lurch because of a 15-year-old rule. Slide 10. In the past, we let people spend less on housing by living on less land and letting them build quickly. Today's low-density rules would require months negotiating a direct control district to rebuild these homes. We can legalize homes, and we can re-legalize homes that we love. Slide 11. Cities can be affordable, create jobs, or ban housing. I'm not aware of any city that has managed to do all three. Please help Calgary be a place that creates jobs and is affordable. Please support the recommendations in full. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Susan.
Hi. My name is Susan Gwynn, and I am here on behalf of Poverty Talks. We are a lived experience steering committee, and we advise the Enough for All strategy. You know, members of Poverty Talks do a lot more than just be members of Poverty Talks. Many of us help provide basic needs, things like showers, food, clean underwear, and advocate for people in a variety of ways. And basically, you know, trying to help people guard their human rights. But members of Poverty Talks, when they heard about this meeting, decided that they would gift me with some of their housing experiences that they are currently living. This isn't like yesterday or last week or whenever, it's today. So one of our members lives in affordable housing. It's a brand new building. It's great, right? Except for it has huge windows that don't open. So without a portable air conditioner, her house, the temperature inside her home increases to unbearable levels. But when she went to her property management company, they said, oh, well, doesn't surprise us at Poverty Talks because it's a Cal housing house. So, and a lot of Cal housing houses are just like that. So in Cal Housing's portfolio, there are many buildings that aren't maintained and not even into even the most minimal of ways. So those buildings fall into disrepair. And then when a new building goes up, people are rehoused, which is part of the problem that we're facing today. 3 of our members have reported large rent increases, 20, 15, and 12%. These houses haven't been upgraded or updated in any way to justify an increase. One of the houses is leaking. Black mold and actual mushrooms are growing inside of the home. Another member believes that The increase to her rent is due to the extraordinary costs of energy. In this case, NMAX, which we are told is the city's utility. And every time we call, we're told to be nice. So we have another member of Poverty Talks, hang on to your hats, who's living without potable water, meaning they can't drink the water coming out of their tap. But what happens if they complain? They get evicted, their house gets condemned, so they're put into this housing market. They can't afford to stay, but they can't afford to do anything else either. So what comes down to is that they're afraid. And with no controls over who can be a landlord, that means, you know, that's just what it is. And especially with one of the worst offenders carrying my city's name. So some of our members have also taken in other members of their family for fear of being homeless. And that's just Poverty Talks. That's our 12-person steering committee. The situations of the people that we serve are much worse. They face utility bills that they can't afford. They have a cutthroat vacancy rate with landlords holding all of the power. We have a city that says, you know, when it comes to tent cities, well, we'll just rip them out and move them on to nowhere that has hope, nowhere that's a house, nowhere that's a home, because being a Calgarian means that you need to have a property tax bill. That's what it feels like to us. So we love the recommendations. We're never going to say no. On the other side of that, what are you doing for people today that are going, some people I bet who are here, who are leaving here and going to what? So what does this do for today's people? It's great for 3 years down the road, but today we have tent cities. We have people without food, we have people without shelter, we have people without drinking water, we have people without clean underwear. And that's all.
Thank you, Susan. Emma.
Mayor Gondek, Chair Penner, members of council, thank you for allowing me to speak in favor of these recommendations. My name is Emma MacIsaac, and I'm here on behalf of In From the Cold, Alberta's largest low-barrier family emergency shelter. I'm here to share some stories about what we're seeing at the Inn. Starting with Sarah and Jake, two parents of 7 children. In January, when Sarah was 4 months pregnant, complications arose, forcing her to stop working. That month, their landlord increased the rent by $600. Things went from bad to worse, leading them to the inn where they spent the next 8 months. Their daughter Maya spent their first 3 months of her life in shelter. After months of searching, hundreds of applications, we finally found the family housing in August. At the time, they were our longest shelter stay. Jennifer, single mom of 3, faced with a rent eviction and found herself at the inn this past January. Jennifer has applied to over 500 places to live and has only had 9 viewings. She shares stories of showing up to those viewings with 40 other people, landlords telling her they don't rent to people on subsidy support and they don't want kids in their rental. She's now been in shelter for 9 months, which is now our longest stay. Barry and Kathryn, when their landlord increased their rent by $750, they had nowhere to go with no housing available, shelters were full, and they resorted to camping on Crown land for 2 months with 3 children under 3. They're thankfully now safe in shelter, looking for a new home. And now Megan, single mom of 4 kids. She spent 6 months in shelter and found a home in June. Last week she called us as her landlord increased her rent by $500 and she can't afford to stay. She asked if she could come back, but sadly, we are full. These are just a small handful of the many families struggling in our city. Family homelessness is often called hidden homelessness, but it's no longer hidden. And it is now common for us to see families come to us from very unsafe living conditions. Living in encampments, sleeping in bus shelters, riding the C train, sleeping in malls, living in cars. One family even told us they lived in the airport for 2 weeks. These parents apply for hundreds of rentals, and if any result in a viewing, they are met with discrimination based on race, income support, and the fact that they have children. They face multiple barriers like credit checks, bank statements, references, employment letters, and background checks. These parents are feeling hopeless, and our staff are burnt out. Last month, we received 180 calls from families seeking help, our highest number ever. Last week, we had 5 newcomer families show up on our front step in one single day. Our staff get teary-eyed, recounting the devastation of telling these families we were full. We've never witnessed anything like this. Last year, we supported 1,427 families. The year before that, 756. The year before that, 400. We're on track to surpass these again. Our average length of stay doubles by the minute because people have nowhere to go from shelter. And I just want to make it very clear that everyone here understands when we talk about families at the inn, this is children. Last year, this was 2,912 children experiencing the trauma of a housing crisis. If you're having a hard time picturing what that looks like, that's about the population of the town of Black Diamond. These recommendations provide a ray of hope for these families. These are not just a set of policy proposals, they're a lifeline for our city's residents. We cannot underestimate the urgency of this situation. It's not just about numbers and statistics or parking spots and density, it's about the lives of our family, friends, neighbors, community members, and children. This is about ensuring children have a roof over their heads, that families can stay together, and that our city remains a place where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. These are bold and necessary steps forward with the potential to transform lives and give families hope. As you cast your votes today, or tomorrow or Saturday, I urge you to remember the faces of the stories of those suffering from the housing crisis. Let their struggles and aspirations guide your decision making. At the Inn, we have a proven track record in addressing these issues. Our collaborative partnership with HomeSpace and the first office to affordable housing conversion demonstrates this. And we in the sector are ready to roll up our sleeves and support you in getting this work done. Together, we can make a profound difference, not only in addressing our housing crisis, but in defining the kind of compassionate and resilient city we aspire to be. Please vote yes in support of these recommendations. Thank you for your time and consideration. Calgary is watching, and our future depends on your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Jordan.
So we're just going to start the presentation with a quick little video we threw together.
In our housing crisis, but in defining the kind of compassionate and resilient city we aspire to be. Please vote yes in support of these recommendations.
No problem. Everyone deserves to feel safe and happy in their home. But finding a comfortable place to live that one can afford can be a daunting task in today's housing market. Even in our highly connected world, people can find themselves feeling more and more disconnected. It's hard enough to meet new people, let alone find a good roommate. So what makes a good roommate? Well, that can be different for everyone. This is where Good Roommate can help. Good Roommate is on a mission to change the way we think about housing and aims to champion the benefits of living together in shared spaces. By connecting groups of compatible tenants, sometimes from different walks of life, and helping them adopt proven systems to create and maintain a home, Good Roommate supports the development of shared homes that are enriching for both tenants and homeowners. We believe a home is more than just a physical structure. It's a place where people can grow together and create a sense of belonging, safety, and comfort. Whether you are a homeowner or tenant and want to become a part of a Good Roommate home, connect with us on our app or at goodroommate.org. Great, so we'll pull up the presentation, if we can. Our presentation as well. So just to maybe start out, my name is Jordan. This is Oasis, and we're here representing a brand new startup called goodroommate.org. First of all, we'd like to thank the mayor and the council for putting together this task force. We hugely applaud this initiative as we're going to get into, we have seen a growing demand for housing in our little community that birthed this project. So I wish that I had heard about this task force earlier. For the last 4 months, we have been developing this company, and we just found out about the task force very recently, driving by Confederation Park and seeing your wonderful billboards. We figured this meeting would be a great opportunity to announce our existence and express our strong interest in working with the city and any other partners in the room who figure we could share our programs with them to help create better homes. Can we go to the next slide? So this is the video slide. We'll skip this one. Thank you. Okay. So a quick background on the project. So there is a cute...
I'm sorry, Mr.
Lindsay.
Mr. Lindsay Jordan, can I just get you to pause for a minute?
Sure.
Clerks, procedurally, we should be speaking to the item, and I apologize. This is not an appropriate place for a business pitch. I respect the work that you're doing, so if you could get into the reasons specifically, maybe the indicators that you're seeing in your early success, about why you support the strategy, but we are not here to hear a business pitch today. I am all for startups. This is not a pitch stage, though.
Sure, okay. Why don't we switch to the next slide then? So we have been looking at your recommendations, and we see that we fit very nicely into 3 particular categories. We believe that our programs will be essentially increasing capacity or taking advantage of capacity that already exists in the city. So we've been, as we've started our word of mouth advertising, we've found multiple live-in homeowners who have spare bedrooms that are currently being unused that we feel with our support in helping them design a house that feels safe and effective for them, they will be able to bring new people into their home and thus increasing the capacity of supply for everyone else as we also create...
I hate to interrupt. Question of privilege, Chair. This is very pitchy, and if you are interested in working with the city in some way, this will ensure that you can't. There's a process that you have to follow.
Okay.
And doing this in this public manner will not make you able to work with us. So this is something that I need some legal advice on. Before you say another word, let's find out what we have to do.
So procedure bylaws, we have a procedure bylaw which governs our meetings. And when making a submission to council or a council committee, so we are a council committee, a member of the public must limit their comments to the matter contained in the report and the recommendations being discussed. So I think if you were to take a pause and reframe this and perhaps say, again, what are those indicators of what you're seeing? And support, reframe this as support for some of the recommendations or not support. I think otherwise we're going to have to ask you to end your presentation.
Okay.
If I may, please. I do apologize for the pitchy approach, very much so. The reason why we wanted to come and say we are supportive of the recommendations were because we have seen, and personally my first experience as a single parent of 5 kids coming from domestic violence 5 years ago and able to maintain my home and keep my home, through harmonious living with other small communities in the city, allowed me to understand that there is a place where we can support and bring some recommendations to the committee today. The recommendations that we may want to make are that we could use what we have existent now while the city develops other strategies. There are homeowners that live by themselves and have 2-3 other rooms in the city, but they have no way to connect to other people in the city looking for homes. I find that there was a lot of conversation today about immigrants coming in. I am an immigrant myself. The first 3 years in Canada, we lived the first 2 years in Montreal, which was a lot more socially guided towards supporting people coming in. And then we moved to Calgary, and it was a very big learning curve. We had to bid for our basement suite with one child, and at the time it was a disaster. I think we are in a similar economy right now where people have to bid, and they don't know if they're going to have a place to live. So our recommendation would be to consider supporting something that would give access to current availability already, that people just don't know how to market, how to connect with safe other renters. There's seniors people that have 2-3 rooms that they don't know how to connect with, say a system that allows them safety at the same time a growing community. So what I also heard a lot today was that we're looking to increase the number of houses because we want to increase the quality of living. The quality of life itself for us increased because we had a stable home. To have that stable home, I had to put systems in place as a single parent and have these kind of more harmonious relationship management pieces that did not exist out on the market. I had to create those for myself and to create and build that community for myself and my children. So I'm finding that as a recommendation.
I hate to interrupt. Time is up. No, thank you both for being here with us today. Oasis, if you could actually just give your full name to clerks, we just do need to record it for the public record. So you can just go see Chantal over there. And that is it then for this panel, and we will go to questions from council. So Councillor Meehan, you are first.
No, thank you. My first question is for Teresa Goldstein. Thanks for being here, Teresa, and we've mostly heard from folks who are speaking in favor of the Housing Affordability Task Force recommendations, and we know that later in the day we'll hear from folks who don't support it. And so I know there's a lot of consternation specifically around the base RCG that is recommended here. So what do you say to people who oppose the base RCG, citing arguments like, our neighborhood shouldn't change without our input, it's anti-democratic?
Yeah, thank you. I was going to say thank you for the question, but I don't think we're allowed to say that anymore. I'm just kidding. Now I lost my train of thought. No, I'm kidding. So the main piece around this idea of conversion is that it actually is already happening. So this isn't something new inside communities. We build homes made out of wood primarily. Our large multis obviously are made out of some forms of other, but wood has a life. And eventually, even if we do nothing, our homes are going to either need to be repaired or torn down, and something else is going to go in its place. And when that happens, this idea of allowing flexibility in the land use allows the landowner more discretion to understand what their future needs are. Council's job is to think about the future of our city, and it's not really possible to do a crystal ball, but we do know that the needs and the changes and the wants of housing is changing. We have a large aging demographic that's going to need very different homes and space than we used to, which I experienced myself, which was at the beginning of my talk. And so when we think about democracy or anti-democratic or taking out a step, I don't think of that at all, because a lot of the discussion that happens at the community level and that's already happening at the community level is about details that are not available inside the land use. They want to know what the home looks like. They want to know where the doors are, where the windows are, and they want to have feedback, real engagement with the people that are doing it. And that doesn't really, it can happen at the land use stage in my experience over time. I mean, there's some things that you can have influence over, but largely those details come at the next step. And I think we've heard that a lot today.
Thanks. And just as a follow-up to that, what would you say to folks who say, we shouldn't support something like a base RCG because it could change our neighborhood, when the real culprit is things like interest rates and labor shortages? That's what's driving unaffordability. What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, I actually really enjoyed the speakers this morning that talked about this direct correlation between wages and housing, right? Because If wages go up, obviously then we are not maybe in the same crunch of affordability. But the lever that we're talking about today is making the housing more available so that if the wages maintain or go down or whatever it might be, the interest rate goes up, we have to spend more on housing, we're able to find more supply. And so I think especially around the trades, when we were looking at the corporate affordable housing strategy way back in the early 2010s, there was a direct correlation between industrial land sales and housing. And the reason that that was made by the city was because there was this idea that to ensure that industrial developments were successful, they needed employee housing. They needed the housing piece to go with that. And so I would say it's almost like a chicken and an egg. Like we don't have enough skilled labor or trades, but we also don't have housing to house them. I know Canmore has been having this discussion quite actively in the media. And I think where you are today, your lever, your tools are about housing. And that's the lever that you can really impact.
Thanks so much for that answer. I have one or a couple questions for Nathan.
Hey.
Nathan, so you're a member of Calgary Planning Commission, and you did disclose that. And so that means, just for those who don't know our city processes, administration makes a recommendation on the basis of city policy about a land use. It comes to the Calgary Planning Commission, and then your job is to make a recommendation to council as to what we should do. According to the mandate of CPC, you're supposed to advise and assist us with the orderly and economical development of housing. You're part of the system. You're saying we need to change the system by adopting these recommendations. And so what would that do for the orderly and economical development of housing in this city?
Well, I'm a nerd, and so I made graphs. I think if we turn to slide 13, I can talk about the economical portion. So there's an annual report that comes from Altus. They're a construction consultants. Oh, these are city numbers. So this is RC1, RC2, and RCG coming from administration. That's the right one? Yep. If you look at those median parcel values pre-construction, so what affects the cost of housing? Land and construction. So here we have, let's assume that median parcel value is just the raw land. We can divide that by the number of units. If we go to the next slide, that takes us to that. There you go, $700,000 for the land to build, to knock down a small detached house and build a big detached house, which is our default model throughout 60% of the city. If you were building semi-detached, it's closer to $300,000 just for the land, and less than $200,000 if you were building RCG. That's the city's numbers based on the last 5 years. We have rules about how much land you have to be able to buy before you can live there. If we go to the next slide, this is the minimum lot requirements. These are not dollars, this is square meters per unit. So 1,100 square meters, so a quarter of an acre, is required in one land use district. Our default is about 330 square meters per unit. If you can't afford that much land, tough luck, you have to find another district farther down. So those are the city's rules. We used to let people live on less land. We could go to the next slide and look at the construction costs. This is Altus. You'll see a step up from about $190 per square foot for new row houses, starter homes, and three-story stacked townhouses. To put that in words, we would call that RCG for that first one. Starter home could be RC1, though these days that's mostly out in the RG area, and then HGO. And then there's a step up to about $230 a square foot for 6-story wood frame, and then closer to $290 for the 12 and up. If we go to the next slide, I have to admit, I didn't include one form. It's the custom-built single-family residential. When you knock down, this is what Calgarians are doing. When they knock down an old detached house, they build a very expensive detached house where the average cost is about $700 per square foot. They're allowed to do that, not a problem at all. But don't be surprised that when you do that, next slide, it ends up being very expensive. So RCG, these are the City of Calgary stats. It turns out that that RCG is producing more affordable housing, more attainable housing than RC1 by default. And yeah, apparently in the last 5 years, we'd have 113 people build houses that cost over 2 million something up there. So that's the economical argument. It costs less per square foot. That's what we're seeing. That's what the people in the industry say. Orderly, we don't really have a good working definition of that line in the CPC bylaw, to the best of my understanding. So the only thing I can say about order is that it seems, if you look at the MDP, if you look at area redevelopment plans, we believe in order in terms of neat and tidy. We like little rows. We say, this is the row where you can build 6 stories. This is the row where you can build 12. Heaven forbid that a block away from that, you could build something that's a little closer to that height. What that does is it distorts the land prices. It says, great, you can bet that this is going to be worth a lot of money. I mean, if we talk a lot about nodes and corridors. People are big proponents of it. But if you look at the stats in the developed areas, activity centers are about 7% of the land area, and main streets or corridors, 6%. So when we say we're going to put 50% of our growth in this area and 50% outside, but don't worry, we're only going to put it in these handful of places. Of course, when you say we're going to put 50% of our growth in 13% of our land, you're going to end up with saying that land is worth a lot. Partly because we refuse to say 1 block away you could do the same thing. We treat it in those neat and orderly, tidy things. I'm not a planner, but I did take an international relations theory class. It was painful. But the first week we read about...
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you just because I think we're getting a little bit away from it. So I hear you about
We need a system that creates order from the bottom up instead of neat and tidy rows.
Okay, all right. Well put on the economical and hearing you on the spontaneous, orderly. And I know that you keep count of all of the units that we're approving, and how many units do we need to build?
How many do we need? I've made some more numbers on that. So let's go to slide 22. So in the so back in the spring, there was some discussion about having 110,000 people arrive in Calgary in the next 4 years. Apparently that's 62 people a day. Let's assume that that's the same number as Calgary households, 2.6. We can divide that. That's 24 houses a day just to tread water. Let's go to the next slide. The report from last week said we need the number of households in need of affordable housing options is forecasted to reach close to 100,000 by 2026. If we were to build those all from scratch, well, we can divide that by the number of days. That's 68 homes a day. Let's go to the next slide. We haven't talked about suppressed household formation, because it turns out that sometimes people like to start new families, or sometimes people say, this is an awful family, we need to get out. Some estimates from last year based on the 2021 census suggest that Calgary needs somewhere between 40 to 50,000 households, or there are 40 to 50,000 unformed households. And that if we were to double our building pace from 2016, it would take 3 to 5 years to build that many homes. So that was 35 houses a day, that's 70 homes a day. Let's add those together, let's go to the next slide. That takes us to 162 homes a day. Even if my numbers are way off, even if there's a lot of overlap between those groups, let's say it's only half that. Maybe it's only 80 homes a day. Let's go to the next slide and look at what our completions have been. We've never topped 40. We have a system that doesn't produce the houses that we need. We're actually talking growth planning now instead of where shadows will fall. So let's pop to the next slide. I went back and looked at the home completions per 100 Calgarians. When my parents were buying a house, we were building over 2 homes per 100 Calgarians, and in the last 20 years, we've never hit that. I can understand the growth plummeting in the early 80s when we had a recession. I'm kind of surprised we didn't build more houses when the divorce rates went up in the 90s. But since 2002, I mean, one family lives in a house and then needs 2 houses. It's not rocket science. But for the last 20 years, we have not topped that.
Thank you.
2007, we have a new land use bylaw, and the numbers go down.
Thanks, Nathan. This
We
was
need
a
a new
far more
system.
robust answer than I was expecting. So, thank you very, very much. That was impressive. Those are all my questions, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Walcott.
Sorry, I couldn't see. How many slides are there? Like I just wanted to know. They're in the submission, of course. Sorry. Let me just gather myself now. I wanted to actually. I don't have a question for Susan. I don't have a question, but I wanted to offer something and then maybe just allow that to spur a response. I felt it would be insincere for us to brush over the comment that there is nothing now. I wouldn't want to walk out of this room saying that you're not responding to it, or at least not addressing the fact that you're completely right.
We know.
What we see and what we know is we are so behind the curve that even the most immediate actions will be a drop in the bucket to address the need. And so I just did not want to go through this process and have you say that, sit down, go back up there, and then no one acknowledge the fact that we as council are very fully aware of our failures and are hopefully preempting a conversation in another 6 years.
100%.
So.
And that, I mean, Poverty Talks sent me here to support. I'm in support. Don't get me wrong. Support it. That these motions and these actions and all of that stuff. But they also wanted you to know that right now today. So the council of the past did you guys dirty, because now you're dealing with this problem. And you know, to be honest, my speech was much different, but I have a 3-year-old living in my house because his parents are homeless. So my son is homeless. I couldn't take in the whole family, but I could take in my 3-year-old grandson. So now my household has changed. I am, every person on Poverty Talks has a story that goes back, and I'm sure you heard the people out front. Every one of them have a story. And this isn't, I get it that the builders stood here for a long time and they talked about, all of the ways that they don't want to really, they don't want to say it, but they don't want to support subsidized housing. And they don't want to say it, but they really just want to build single family homes. And I get that. I understand all of that. And I understand what the model looks like in Calgary. Nothing above 2 stories unless it's in the basement. I get all of that, but the answers aren't there. That the builders need to be, quite frankly, told, no, we can't do that anymore. We have to do something different because all of us are struggling. And we are all saying, like, we need something better. We need something different from y'all. And sorry, I called you y'all. Probably not an official council term, but at the end of the day, right? But at the end of the day, we need you to know that, yeah, I could have given you my nice polished speech, but we need you to know that it is this desperate. We're coming on winter. I'm filling 83, 84 hamper requests a day. And that's just in Ward 5. Like I live in the Northeast. But, what's the rest of the city doing? Like, how many other people are in need? And how many are hidden? I mean, nobody would know. You roll up on my house, doesn't look like we have an experience with homelessness. We're in a house. There's all of us together. We're having a great time. But my 3-year-old grandson's missing his parents every day. So, that's all.
I appreciate it.
No problem.
I'm going to bring back up Nathan at our own at our
Do
own.
you want more slides?
I bet you I'm going to ask a question
No
that's
one
going to have a
wants
slide. Nathan, I came to know who you were because of a Twitter thread like 4 years ago
sorry.
on infrastructure. Okay. And reading through the package and reading through some of the concerns of that have been expressed by my colleagues in administration, the Twitter thread exercised the connection between density, infrastructure, and going so far as to actually talk about affordability or financing of the infrastructure over time. It's been a while. I'm not asking you to remember the entire thread.
Okay.
But I'm wondering if you can talk to that any further, because that is one of the primary concerns we hear from the community, that we hear from some of my colleagues, is we can densify, but what do you think is the impact it's going to have on infrastructure from your perspective?
Okay. Well, I know that every time an application comes to the Planning Commission, utility engineering has already approved it. They've given the thumbs up. It meets the infrastructure. The infrastructure can handle it, and so they're comfortable with that. I would say that. Actually, can we go to slide 21? I just wanted to do that. No, I wrote it down, so I wouldn't have to remember. So a couple of years ago, I went through the municipal manuals, and this is the amount of pavement that we have per person over time. We've paved a lot of city, and that means that the taxes are probably going to go up unless we just say, well, I guess we're not going to maintain all of our streets. And so anytime we can let a few more people live where we already have infrastructure, we can, in theory, divide the cost of maintaining. I mean, if you had a 50-foot frontage and you let 4 people live on that, then there's 12.5 feet of pavement per person. I'm getting a head nod on the division. I'm so glad about that. That seems like good math, and it lets people live where we already have infrastructure instead of having to worry about how we pay for the next generation's infrastructure management. Doesn't like calling it liabilities, but liabilities.
Thank you so much. My last question is to Ms. Goldstein. I want to talk about the limitations of the previous strategy, whether it be you're free from administration now. So when you're looking at the solutions that were put forward in this one, why weren't they in the last one? And so when I ask that question, I don't mean it as a call out. I actually mean, what were the circumstances that were so different in 2015 that, here we are 8 years later doing something a little bit that is considered transformative. But as far as I'm concerned, you and your team have been ringing the bell for a very long time. And so I was curious if you could walk me through some of the differences between the two different atmospheres.
Sure. And I'll caveat this heavily that there was a decision in 2015 around the existing housing strategy that was really the impetus for the 2016 strategy. When the task force came together in September of last year, the real marching orders were to look at housing affordability, all housing affordability, which is what you have before you today. The previous, in my opinion, the previous corporate affordable housing strategy really focused on bringing the not-for-profit sector together and scaling them up to get a lot of below-market homes together, and then created the framework for further programs around this private and public and not-for-profit partnership together. There was also an incredible campaign, the Resolve campaign, that was going on at the time, and I don't speak on behalf of any of this, but I do know that that was an incredible model between the not-for-profits, housing builders, private sector, to deliver housing and deliver housing fast, and they delivered thousands of units through that program. And so I think contextually, maybe housing affordability was broadened out for the plan that's before you today, rather than it being a lot of supports to bringing the sector together, scaling them up, getting their capacity going. One of the things I was going to say to Councillor Meehan around this idea of having gaps in skilled trades is actually at the time, back in 2016, there was a lot of question on whether the not-for-profit sector at the time could grow with the housing strategy that the federal government had just released. And so a lot of the supports inside that strategy targeted that capacity building. I would say the one before you today really focuses on the whole housing sector. I've heard this kind of conversation, my friends, my family, talking about like, where's the line? When we think about policy, when we think about climate strategy, when we think of layering all these pieces together, where are the lines between them? And you can see it. They are dependent on each other. The climate strategy is embedded, the pieces are embedded in this. I always get that conversation about, well, you want to intensify, well, you're going to lose green space. And I said, this is a policy decision that we can do together, right? We can say, let's plant 5 trees for every new home that goes in instead of just 1, or private trees. So I think there is a more of a focus in this strategy around that full housing affordability, although the other one talked very extensively about housing as a continuum.
Thank you so much. You honestly, I surprised you with the question, but I assumed you'd know.
I'm surprised I actually remember all of that, to be honest with you.
It's the it's the intersection.
And if there's lots of other people that know a lot of details about that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. I'm gonna pivot to Emma to follow up on that question, actually. So, I know you have. I don't believe actually. I can't remember when you started with In From the Cold, but I know that you were with the city before. But when you're looking back at that same time period, a lot of effort was done to scale up the sector to ensure that the sector can meet some of the increasing needs. Has it met the needs?
No. An example: our new building, Neoma. There are 72 units of affordable housing. We have access to 35 of those units. It was very exciting when we moved from our shelter in the Beltline. We housed almost 20 families immediately, right from shelter into that building. We were full within weeks. And we can't keep up.
To be honest, that's all I actually,
Okay.
That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Councilor Warnes, before I come to you, she's online. I just want to make a note because Susan mentioned very much some health and safety violations that exist in some of our properties. So I'm wondering, Mr. Dalgleish, if you can be prepared to get us, I know you have some information now, but be prepared to get us some information that maybe we could speak to, or if you're prepared now, does the city have a role in it?
Is this on the unsafe conditions matter?
Yeah.
What I can say broadly now is that we do have a safety response unit, and that safety response unit, on an inquiry complaint basis, along with safety codes officers, we do attend to safety concerns. And if it's within our jurisdiction, we would respond to it and address it. If it's beyond our jurisdiction, we would make sure that we refer it. We do work cross-corporately, across the corporation as well, to address issues. And with respect to anything we've been hearing at this committee meeting and that we subsequently hear, we'll be working to follow up on that as well.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Okay, Councillor Warnes, go ahead.
Thanks. And Stuart, thanks for that answer, but it would have been nice to hear that response when these issues came before audit committee or the current renovictions that my office has been advocating for people that are trying to be renovicted in Calgary housing. But my question now is for Nathan. I have a question about your data. And do you have any stats on the cannibalization of housing units into short-term rentals?
I don't. Short-term rentals, I understand there's a study being done on it. I look forward to whatever those results look like. I guess part of me says that if we had enough housing, then it wouldn't matter if a handful of them became short-term rentals. But that's probably not as helpful as you'd like.
Because I think that's the challenge. We're talking about housing units and RCG, And it's all on the premise that those will actually be long-term ownership or rentals for individuals and not speculation and moved into short-term rental gains. And that's kind of why I'm curious, because if we're seeing that, we're hearing that from Calgarians asking, like, why aren't we addressing that part of the issue? And yet we don't have data. So it's that gray area of what we're trying to solve here. So I was just hoping that because you did such a thorough investigation on it, that you might have stumbled across some data.
I would love to have that data. I'd love to have more data. We don't even have a census anymore. One of the interesting things about short-term rentals is that when you take things off of the market, yes, it affects the price. That also suggests that adding houses back onto the market influences the price too.
No, that's for sure, but that we're in an imbalance. But my next question is, did you look at occupancy per unit in the city and what that looks like the further out you get versus the inner core?
I've not looked at that. I know that the math on the 22 units and 22 suites was based on Westbrook's average for the RCG district, where it's 2.23 per unit. But no, I haven't looked at that. I know in general household sizes seem to be going down, which probably makes an argument for building more small homes.
Actually, because I happen to have that here, in Ward 8, the occupancy per unit is 1.9, and our occupancy per unit that's the greatest goes to Ward 5 at 3.6. And the further out you go, we're actually finding higher occupancy because we are building more apartment blocks further out. We are building the row townhouses along with the single family. So, which brings me into my next challenge and the comment about building industry not wanting to subsidize affordable units. But I think the point is, who covers the subsidy? So if we're talking about blanket rezoning RCG, and we're getting a bit frustrated and pointing fingers at build, what do you think the homeowners in the inner city that currently have a house, how do you think they would feel if inner city developers a requirement for them to have a subsidized unit in their RCG rebuild?
That's an interesting question. I know that Portland has come up with an inclusionary zoning approach where if you build 20 units, then one of them needs to be affordable. What it's done is produced a lot of 19-unit buildings. I don't know what would happen if you did that with 4 units and 4 suites. I know that I built a backyard suite in the last couple of years. The numbers went up a lot from 2020 to 2023 when we finished it, but I don't know. I mean, I can't build a basement suite and have a backyard suite, but would you require that I have one of those units be below market rate? Would you what would you do when you talk about that few numbers in terms of RCG?
But you say every unit makes a difference, and yet we're not really addressing the needs of those that are living in their cars right now. So wouldn't that be a good policy to be advocating for if RCG is going to help us create housing units, and yet we do know that they're going to short-term rentals and not below market. So we're really not helping those in poverty get a roof over their head, and we haven't even had this discussed in a policy document that's supposed to help us create affordable living and solve the housing crisis.
Do we know that they're becoming short-term rentals? I don't think we have the stats on that.
There's a pretty good estimate of it. You can look to other major cities, the conversations in New York, Vancouver, even some of the data or information I've been told, it's there. And even our downtown strategy conversions in applications, we're hearing that the backup plan always for an entity is to lean back on short-term rentals. It's how the market's gone. It's look through headlines in newspapers across Canada. This is the conversation. So I'm just wondering why a caveat is, if we're hearing from people that desperately need housing, why is that recommendation that if an RCG unit is built in the inner city or in the areas where we're going to see that happen in redevelopment, not have a requirement for, and this is because I'm kind of pushing you on this one because you're on planning commission. So it's that conversation that's kind of missing in here is we're pointing fingers at one industry of building homes and leaving this conversation out of another. So yeah.
I wouldn't say that I'm pointing fingers at the industry. I think
No. It just kind of happened earlier in the meeting today. It's not you specifically, but I'm saying in the conversation council has witnessed today.
The answer to affordable housing is subsidized housing. It's not rocket science. You get funds from other governments with money and you build houses. The answer for housing affordability is going to be much more difficult. But it needs to include, in my opinion, missing middle because that's the cheapest per square foot. And because it makes it possible to build those family-sized homes and smaller suites as well. And they're way easier to adapt than tall towers, which is one of the things that we're learning from the downtown conversion challenge.
But I'm still not hearing that requirement for some of those rentals to be below market housing. Is it just because it's an individual landowner we wouldn't want to put it on them?
Councillor Winus.
I'll stop.
Yeah, and I'm going to remind all of my committee colleagues that we have a procedure bylaw that we really can't get argumentative with presenters. If a presenter doesn't have an answer, I don't think that we can, I am saying this to everybody. If a presenter doesn't have an answer or an opinion on your question, we cannot keep harassing them to provide an answer. So with that, Councillor Winus, you have 17 seconds if you have any other questions.
Nope.
Okay, Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. You can come back up. Sorry. I don't see a copy of your presentation in our distribution yet.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I just wanted to look at something, but I have to ask you, did you have a slide in there that shows a planning continuum?
As in the entire housing continuum?
No. Sorry. I think that's me that's making that sound. The planning continuum, like the City of Calgary planning continuum, like the from idea to.
I did not have.
Okay,
that was
you need
not
to
in
add that in there. That's going to be in that presentation.
Okay.
You missed that one. The reason I'm asking, and because you are very well versed in the process, so am I. And the 1P 2007 bylaw, written after 25 years, was out of date, like the day it was public.
Certainly by 2004.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the issues you talked about in your presentation are technically, planning problems that don't always see the light of day with, I would say, a council that, every 4 years is an election and other priorities. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions. If you feel like you can't answer it, by all means. But being part of the process that you're in the process of CPC, which you go, an applicant applies, goes through the system of land use and development permits, come to CPC. Do you, do you think that there's an opportunity that CPC doesn't have to review things? Or do you think that council should be removed completely from reviewing land use applications?
I think there are some applications that should be so simple that we should just say that's part of owning property. You get to do that by yourself. I see community associations come in and say, we're going to appeal this daycare application. Maybe save your powder for that 20-story apartment on the cul-de-sac instead.
Okay, so you think that just small scale, like the RCG, should not come to planning to council?
That's my opinion, yes.
That's your opinion, okay. How about just removing the CPC process in its entirety of all of them? Because by the time it comes to council, it seems that the city has already approved what they want and, council has the conversation. Do you think we need CPC in between?
I know there are some people who think that, who refer to CPC as a rubber stamp. And I think part of that is because of the question that council keeps asking commission, is this appropriate? Council could give a whole lot of different direction to CPC. There are some cities that have, Vancouver's during the heat dome, they sat down one weekend and said, here's our memo about air quality and extreme heat. Mm-hmm. And the Calgary Planning Commission isn't authorized to do that. We are simply part of the process. We come along, application arrives, process. But there's no ability for initiative or response to other things that we see. So, in my opinion, yeah, you could change the
We could
rules.
change what-
They're your rules.
So you're saying that, we could modernize Calgary Planning Commission and what they see and what they don't see.
My understanding is that's part of the bylaw review that's going on right now. They haven't asked me what I think yet, so I'll keep my...
Well, they're probably going to ask you after today's presentation.
They might.
Okay, and in the planning continuum, generally the development permit is what kind of holds up the, the next phase, which is building and, release, and you know all of this stuff. Do you think we can shorten our timelines there?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know.
Okay.
I do wonder how much of the development permit delay also goes into the appeal process. And one of the recommendations that I like is the dwelling unit change, so that there's no reason to appeal a house unit being added in a housing neighborhood.
And the reason I ask is that across Canada, Calgary has the fastest development permit process and building permit process. We're really proud of that, and we should talk about that. The one issue that we have been hearing is, the land use around RCG. Do you feel, in your opinion, and you don't have to answer as a Calgary Planning Commission, as a citizen, that removing the public from speaking to that, item that comes to council, they're causing the delay?
Well, I asked administration about how long it takes to go from application to public hearing. I think it's about 24 weeks.
From application to public hearing?
To public hearing. That's the average
So
for RCG.
then it's kind of administration that's holding up, like the bureaucracy in between from application to public hearing, and then allowing that person to come talk one day is 24 weeks. Do you think we could shorten that 24 weeks?
In my perfect world, it would be 3 hours. Submit at 9 o'clock and walk out with your permit at noon.
Perfect.
But
I
don't know what that
I
would
like
take.
where you're going with that. Thank you. You've answered the questions I wanted to get to.
Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Hawryluk, sorry, thank you. Just along the same line of that same question from Councillor Sharp. You just said 3 hours versus 24 weeks, right? And Councillor Sharp referred to a lot of our bureaucratic processes in there. I think the question would be to yourself, being on CPC, are there times in which questions that are asked, and you know this, a lot of times the questions are also DP related, and push it off. But are there the times where the questions that be asked by the public are genuine land use questions as it relates to RCGs? That, in other words, that they should be asked at CPC or at public hearing?
Well, occasionally I'll listen to public hearings and say, oh, yeah, I could have asked that about that one application had I known that that was going to be a big concern. But I'm picturing if somebody wanted to build something right beside my house, my opinion would probably be development permit related. I would look at it and say, oh, kind of like them to have a light color so that it can reflect more light into my basement instead of, black. That's not a land use question, so.
I'm taking point one application in Bankview where the application was backing onto a school. There was a question of, the back was onto a street, the front was onto a street. CPC, I believe, recommended it. Came to council refused it, simply because it wasn't a question of housing, it was a question of proximity, a question of safety, a question of, that. And if we didn't have CPC there, and if we didn't have council there, it would have gone through, and it would have came as a DP question.
If I remember right up on that one, there was some discussion about changing it to an RCGX application, and the applicant said no, and so council said, well, fine, we can refuse it.
My point is there are times where council or CPC have listened to the public relative to land use on an RCG, RCGX, and refused it for very good land use reasons. So, that may be one of 95, or the one that we were actually rejected, but there are times that we do that, correct?
I would say that the downside of that is it makes 100% of the applicants pay a consultant so that they can get a 1 in 20 chance of being refused.
Yeah.
And I think that doesn't help with affordability.
No. So where I was going to that is that the 24 weeks getting to that, those are the types of things we expect our administration to scrutinize and, talk to the applicant before it comes to, CPC or Planning Commission, right? And I think that's where we can shorten that window a little bit, where we can be a little more stringent with our applicant, a little more tight to say, hey, these are DP questions, we'll do over there. But as it relates to land use, let's deal with it quickly now. Okay, Ms. Goldstein.
Hi.
Hi, thank you again for meeting with us the other day. The question you and I had a conversation about previously was around the need for housing. And you started by saying the greatest need in housing is on the non-market side, right? That we need to really, really activate, build more non-market housing. A lot of the conversations was also around providing land for non-market housing. When we talk about that and we talk about market housing, in terms of how many units we can generate from the non-market side of the equation versus how many housing units we can generate from market housing side, would you agree that there's a greater opportunity and a greater delivery, quick delivery units on the non-market side?
I can only speak about the work when we were doing through the task force, and the package before you contemplated 1,000 more market units than would normally be built. So we heard Build this morning say, they're pressing along trying to do as much as possible. So this would contemplate 1,000 more, and then 3,000 more that were than were previous for the non-market side. I don't know what the capacity is right now. How many development-ready projects are there? What is sitting waiting for funding? That's another piece that's included in the task force, is that that matchmaking of funding that happens. I know there's been several federal announcements even today around the GST, and I've heard this pipeline of being able to unlock thousands of rental units because of just that one policy decision. And so I would say the need was recognized by the task force that is much greater on the not-for-profit side, so the non-market side. It's historically been very low, right? The 15,000, and back in 2016, we used to say just to get to the average, we need 15,000 additional non-market units. And I would say I never wanted to be average. I wanted it to be more than that, but 15,000 was so lofty.
Right, fair enough. I think all I'm just trying to get at is that we really, really need to push the pedal on the non-market, multi-units side of the equation, because that will get us a lot more units than, dilly-dallying on the small side. Not to say we don't need the small units,
Right. Because we've heard that housing is so interlinked and that people move, some people only stay in one piece forever, which is where they move back and forth. And it's so interlinked that only focusing on one, for example, doesn't help the entire continuum.
Right, thank you. Ms. MacIsaac and Ms. Gwynn, both of you, please. I just want to say two things. Thank you for your compassionate stories of, I don't want to use customers, is not the right word, but the patrons, clients. Thank you. Patrons, clients that you deal with. And we all recognize when we talk about rental in particular, it's people will kick it up to the province, let the province deal with it. Not much that we can do with our end. But my question is there anything that we can do outside of what's stated in his recommendation referring to the province? Is there anything that we can do through bylaw to our administration that can help on the landlord-tenant issue, particularly as it relates to condition, behavior, or arbitration or ombudsman? Is there anything that we can do for you?
I think your recommendations around more tenant education would be really important. I find tenants often don't know their rights and they're faced with scare tactics and they just comply and they don't know kind of any better, or they're faced with multiple increases without knowing that you can only have one increase in 12 months and then they just leave. without properly going through like RTDS. So definitely, I think on the like education side, and then we see a ton of landlord discrimination. So I'm not sure what's within the city's powers on that, but it is a huge issue. It's discrimination on race, income, family size, and it's not good.
Ms. Gwynn?
I agree. I mean, I 100%. But I also think there needs to be somebody holding these landlords accountable. I mean, there needs to be a way for people in the city to call, say, 311 and say, you know what, my landlord, I have mushrooms in my bathroom, which is a true story, or I can't drink my tap water, and them go straight to the landlord. Skip the tenant. We found this out, doesn't matter how. And if we find out that there's been an eviction notice served on this tenant for any other reason, then they haven't paid their rent or they burned the building down. You know, you guys stay in touch and you monitor that. And I know that that's a lot of responsibility for y'all to take on. Y'all again, sorry. But it seems if you really want to safeguard people, there has to be a way for people to let somebody know what's happening. And then on the other side of that, be safeguarded against eviction, because that's what happens. You know, rent evicted or even, and the whole discrimination thing, I don't know. I mean, I've already mentioned I live in the Northeast. We have multicultural, multi-generational, loving, fabulous, I love my community, don't get me wrong. But in other places, that becomes a problem. You not having a Canadian or from here accent, when you call about a rental, it's not available to you. But we also have, I'm throwing my husband under the bus, but my husband did renovations for a gentleman who was renting to the Newcomers Association. Sorry, the Newcomers, what are you called? Center for Newcomers. Through some sort of hold these houses for these people. But before he did that, he tested the market. He posted his listing, his house for rent. People would come in and see it. And depending on how many people offered him to rent it that day, next week he would increase it by $300. The week after, he'd increase it by $300 to make sure that the newcomers were paying the highest possible rent he could get for it. It's things like that. Landlords need to be taken down a notch. It sounds mean, but it's true.
Okay. Thank you for that. One of the things that we did a couple of years ago, Council hosted a session for anti-racism, three days of listening to that. Perhaps there's an opportunity for Council to do a landlord sort of issue. Not so much to, because through that we advocated through federal, provincial governments as what we could do with racism. There's also things that we could do. Perhaps there's something we can do here as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Chabot.
Thank you. My question is for Mr. Hawryluk. Nathan, you mentioned something about the cheapest build on a per square foot basis was RCG, or maybe I misunderstood what you said. Could you help to clarify for me what you meant by that?
I mean that according to Altus, when they call all the construction people in the city and they ask them and take the average, row houses, 3-story row houses have the lowest per square foot construction costs. Now you can make them fancy and put in lots of things and make them sell for more than that, but that is the construction cost.
The construction cost, not necessarily the total cost, though.
Nope, you can make them as fancy as you want depending on access to jobs, because cities are primarily labor markets.
Yeah, no, I'm referring also to land value, because land value in inner city obviously is more expensive than greenfield. And so to build that type of product in the inner city might not be as cost effective as building that same product in a greenfield.
That is true, and certainly what we've seen is that when people knock down single detached and build really big single detached, they also become more expensive too.
That is true.
We agree. Good.
Yes. Thank you. That's the only question I had. Thank you for your submission today.
Councillor Koopmans?
So I was just trying to withdraw that. The question was asked a moment ago. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There are no more questions of this panel. Thank you all for being here with us today. All right, committee, we have a long way to go. We are on panel 6. And just for context for everybody, there are over 30 panels. So, yeah, at the current pace, we have 25 more hours. I'm going to repeat this for all of committee. At the current pace we are moving, we have 25 more hours. I did a bit of a calculation and estimate to put out to the public to give everybody a best heads up. We are absolutely permitted to ask questions of members who are coming and presenting today. But I think respectfully, we also have to understand that there are a lot of people who continue to wait to speak. We have made it through 25 out of 150 people. So I'm going to ask us to be very mindful and tight in our questions and avoid as much preamble as possible. With that, I'm going to stop talking. We are going to move to the next panel and finish that before we break, and it will be a very short break. Willem Klumpenhouwer, Kathryn Davies, Hazen Ellwood, Hanita Simard, and David Barrett, you are the panel before we go for a break. After break, which will be short, like 10 minutes, Robert Tremblay, Greg Miller, Brian Thiessen, Philip Meitzer, and Frank Frey are panel 7. So with that, I believe a lot of those individuals are here. Willem, please go ahead, sir.
That's me. Good afternoon, Mayor and councillors. My name's Willem Klumpenhouwer. I'm a public transit research and data analyst. I did not bring slides like Nathan, so take a deep breath. I'm also a small business owner. I'm a member of More Neighbours Calgary. I grew up in Calgary. I've been away in Toronto for the last 6 years. I moved back because I have a 4-month-old daughter. We just drove across the country with her, and we wanted to come back for the free childcare. Sorry, we wanted to come back to visit grandparents. And because Calgary really is that, it has an entrepreneurial spirit. It's an entrepreneurial city. And I can tell you, because I just moved from Toronto, that housing is indeed crazier in Toronto than it is here, but it's not that much crazier. And I can see the path that Toronto got to and see that Calgary's on the same path unless we take some sort of action to change it. So I am very, very vehemently asking you to approve all of the recommendations here, all of the non-market solutions, all of the market solutions. They are well thought out. Please approve them. I was lucky to find a place in Garrison Woods, just as an example. People seem jealous when I mention that. People really seem to like the neighborhood. There's a variety of homes. There's mansions, but there's row homes, there's apartments, there's seniors living. And I kind of scratched my head and wondered why this neighborhood doesn't exist all over the city. And then I realized it's because it's illegal to build this type of neighborhood in about 70% of the city. These types of homes just can't exist. So please change that. I also want to just add, because I'm a transit guy, that the housing strategy is also a transit strategy. That changing the density of the house, bringing people closer together, bringing a larger variety of homes will make things like transit more successful, will make give people an option about how they get around, and it will make the transit system more efficient, which for you fiscal hawks means that you have to spend less money running it, and it can be shared. The cost can be shared more with the people that live here as well. So yeah, and the last thing I want to mention about transit also, I'll keep it short after Councillor Penner's wonderful remarks about hurrying up. People are being pushed. The other problem that's happening is people are being pushed to compete for homes that exist on the outskirts of the city, right? That's where we are building homes. That's where we're building basically RCG homes. The problem is that introduces this problem called transport poverty. So if you cannot, it doesn't really matter if you can buy a house, but if you can't afford to travel to the jobs you need to travel to or the opportunities that you need to travel to, then you're also still in poverty and there's also still a barrier. And that transport poverty can be alleviated by allowing people to live more efficiently throughout the city and by allowing people to travel more efficiently instead of basically in the living room. I think of a car as two armchairs and a sofa. They can share their trips on transit. So take a deep breath. Please help us move the city forward and approve the strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Willem. And I will just note, presenters of the public, you all have your 5 minutes. Do not feel like you need to rush your presentations. Kathryn.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Kathryn Davies, and I'm a longtime citizen of Calgary. I'm a mom who cares, and I'm also involved with More Neighbours Calgary, a newly formed grassroots pro-housing organization. I am here to offer my enthusiastic support for the housing strategy, which I think is a really incredible, comprehensive suite of policy recommendations that could put Calgary on the map as national leaders in this space. I follow City Council quite closely. I tune in and out of public hearings on land use changes, LAPs, HGO land use districts, transit and budget decisions, and I, like many, will never forget the long and painful death of the Guidebook for Great Communities in 2021. This hearing feels different, though. We are not here to talk about theoretical planning documents or policy technicalities. We are talking about the very real, very present, and very catastrophic individual and societal effects of houselessness and housing insecurity. The decisions made over this weekend will be incredibly consequential and have the power to affect whether or not people have access to a home. I would like to speak briefly to what we all know is the most controversial, really the only controversial piece of these recommendations. I've seen a lot of really hot takes on this notion of blanket upzoning or blanket densification, as though it's some vague, menacing force that is going to seep into our established communities and pollute the air. But the term I prefer is zoning reform, and I use that word reform because it is the correct word for taking something that is bad and making it less bad. Our current zoning system is frankly quite bad. In his book on zoning, Arbitrary Lines, M. Nolan Gray says, regardless of changing prejudices or preferences, our cities and suburbs remain under the shadow of a system of land use regulation carefully calibrated to maintain segregation. Far from merely rationalizing land uses or prudently managing densities, the heart of your local zoning code was more likely than not written with the express intention of separating rich from poor. There is a strong socioeconomic prejudice driving the discourse against zoning reform and against the housing strategy writ large. Our system of zoning is highly exclusionary, and exclusionary zoning is bad. In particular, it is bad for housing affordability. Nearly everyone agrees with this. The experts that formed your own affordability panel recognize this, which is why they recommended what is actually a very modest amount of intensification. Every member of every other housing task force across Canada recognizes this. Affordable housing organizations across the city recognize this. Prominent housing policy experts like Mike Moffat, Carolyn Witzman, Tim Richter recognize this. The federal Conservatives certainly recognize this, and the federal Liberals are starting to come around on the issue, as evidenced by their announcement yesterday. Local and national media seem to recognize this. Prominent local podcasters recognize this. I suspect that even the people who hold up one misinterpreted MIT study as proof that building housing does not make housing more affordable know deep in their hearts that exclusionary zoning, the exclusionary zoning they cling to in the name of neighborhood character is incompatible with affordability. If we want people to be housed, we need houses, and those houses can't all just be built in some other neighborhood. This public hearing feels different because we are finally starting to connect the dots between policies of housing exclusion to people being excluded from homes. There should be no hesitation about zoning reforms. We should be embracing and celebrating zoning reforms for housing affordability, but for myriad other reasons as well. We could get Nathan Hawryluk back up here to talk more about the infrastructure deficit. We could get Willem to come and talk more about how density is necessary to support a functioning transit system. Do you like going for walks with your kids to the ice cream shop? You can't have local amenities without the population to support them. Please, Council, let's stop dithering, let's stop making excuses, let's stop wasting time on pilot projects and endless cycles of engagement. I know the status quo is very seductive, but this situation is urgent and the solutions are clear. Please act now and approve the strategy in full. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question of this panel. It has been made clear to me that Mr. Barrett probably has kids to pick up, that's why I'm... So Hazen and Hanita, I'm wondering if would you let Mr. Barrett go first? Okay, David, come on. Are you sure? I'm okay. You're good now? Okay, Hazen, come on up.
Hey y'all. My name is Hazen Ellwood, but my friends call me Biz. Councilors who vote yes get automatic admittance to the list. Everybody's talking about their profound and illustrious backgrounds, but I'm 20 years old, so I'll spare the deception. But I did volunteer on Mayor Gondek's campaign, and I got really, really good grades in high school. Those grades became a career in construction as I couldn't justify university during the uncertainty of COVID. But I have a counselor's appointment at 4. This is city council, so I'll leave the details for another time. Here's a broad stroke. Unsurprisingly, my job does not pay me enough to decide whether or not I like living with my parents. Even less once you factor in the master's degree that I have to expedite so that I don't get priced out of this city. This economy forces me to live with my parents where I likely could remain until I'm 30. Now, I'm lucky that my parents actually like me, and I'm not here saying that I'm forced to leave, like my beautiful trans and queer friends who otherwise keep in the closet because homelessness is a fear greater than a crushed soul. A secondary function of this year's Pride Festival was networking. Networking between queer folks who hope to have a bed and a roof for the next 30 days. Economic policy and social policy are one and the same. These are not disconnected or zero-sum silos. These are complex problems that we all stand to gain some equity from. That's why I urge the committee to support the housing strategy, including all 33 actions previously outlined by the task force. These actions are a holistic profile that were necessary long ago. We cannot afford to pick and choose. I've lived in Mayland Heights my entire life, a neighborhood within Councillor Chabot's ward. If his vision for Calgary's inner city as a haven for detached residential development were true, our local economy would be despotic. The grocery store I walk to, the pharmacy, the pub, etc., these businesses owned and frequented by neighbors would no longer exist if my neighborhood was built without the land-efficient patronage of multiplexes and condos. To insist that opposition to the housing strategy is somehow conservative or responsible is laughable. Land use regulatory abuse has now squeezed economic opportunity and stability from the entire middle class. It's beyond time for the city to give it back. Some of y'all think blanket RCG is radical for the same reason that my blue-collar coworkers think I'm radical, although they've called me worse. It empowers diversity and it represents a challenge to prescribe power structures. But what RCG allows is what already exists in our most financially resilient communities. Blanket RCG is just legalization of what every civilization before the North American car-dependent development experiment would deem the floor of healthy urban development, not a controversy amidst a housing calamity. As Councillor Sharp graciously identified, 95% of RCG developments are already approved by Council, which clearly argues that these deliberations are vastly distractions from more important issues. The fact that 7 councillors supported the status quo, dragging out the regulatory status to hyper-focus on placating the remaining 5 is confounding. I'd love to hear testimonials from the Moderate Council College of Perfection, but where I come from, 95 is at least an A and represents a passing grade. What's a failure, however, is the idea that a half-baked attempt at not resolving, but just expediting only one of 33 problems outlined by the strategy will do anything. It's not enough to tiptoe around our most entitled constituents. It's not enough to pursue edge development where our most economically disenfranchised are forced to purchase and maintain a car, where the city is forced to spend billions servicing and maintaining new transit, new roads, new sidewalks, new waste management, new schools, libraries, and you guys know better than I do. What's scarier to the skeptical property owners out there? A modest townhome facing a street 3 blocks away, comfortably integrating up to 10 new faces into your local economy, or the ever-increasing property tax that you'll have to pay every year for the luxury of trucking those same 10 people back into the boonies, because Calgary is their home and they're not going anywhere else just because you've forgotten about them. We need to grow our economy without growing our liabilities, and as my friends, housing advocates, a coalition across the political spectrum understand, this means doing what's best for our people too. A woman sitting next to me asked to highlight the potency of retrofitting in this aspect, something that vastly benefits from cutting red tape and is even faster and less controversial. Calgary has exploded recently. We've seen 60 to 70% increases on average rental prices since this council was elected. It's really clear what's happening here. Toronto and Vancouver failed to take swift housing action, and our city is the next destination. Calgary is supposed to be the place where stuff is cheap and life is great. To keep that dream from dissolving, we need bold action, and we need it yesterday. The housing strategy is not perfect. It's just one step, but it's the first step to ensuring we do not repeat the mistakes of our contemporaries and lose our opportunity to become the truly vibrant, welcoming, and resilient destination in Canada that our city deserves to be. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Hazen. Hanita.
Hi, I'm Hanita Simard, and I am a regular person just speaking up in favor of City Council adopting the recommendations of the housing strategy. The flood of 2013 was a defining moment for Calgary. In that crisis, compassion and kindness dominated the stories that were told. Neighbors and strangers helped clean, restore, rebuild, and support each other. The flood showed us how important community is and gave us a way to define ourselves. In 2023, we are facing another crisis, a housing crisis. As with the flood, our response to the housing crisis will reveal who we really are. Are we a city that is actually kind and compassionate? Are we a city where neighbors and strangers care about each other and build community? Swift action is what is required in a crisis. We can't afford to dither. In 2023, in one of the richest cities in the country, people can't find a place to live. That is unacceptable. Calgary does not have enough homes for people to live in, and anything available to buy or rent is breathtakingly expensive. This means that people who don't own a house right now might never own a home. This means that people who have good, well-paying jobs can't find a home to buy or rent. For young people, it means their future is grim. The traditional milestones of independence and adulthood, moving out, getting your own place, and eventually buying a house, are almost unattainable. Those of us who are fortunate to have a home in this city have a responsibility to be part of the solution and ensure housing is available and affordable for everyone, everywhere in Calgary. Those of us who are fortunate to live in communities we love must respond to what is happening around us and evolve our communities so that they can grow and adapt as needed to contribute to a healthy city. Communities are not static. It is time to take action on the recommendations and address the crisis. Inaction, delay, preserve, defend. None of these things are going to solve the housing crisis, nor is implementing tools and policies that create or amplify inequality. That absolutely cannot be allowed. The city must take purposeful action to advance equality, especially in a crisis. The cost of inaction will be our reputation, will be our economic health. If we don't have places for people to live, we will have a city that people can't live in, can't succeed in. And what kind of city is that? I'm super excited by the recommendations to eliminate the RC1 zoning and apply the new RCG zoning throughout the city. This does not mean the end of single-family homes. It means more options. Instead of dictating that only one type of housing option can be built, a variety of homes can be constructed. We desperately need options, and to create those options, we need to do things differently. We need to change zoning so we can build in rather than out, and have more options everywhere. We need to remove parking minimums and improve public transportation. We aren't the first jurisdiction to do this, and we won't be the last. In no place where zoning has changed have the predictions of destruction come true. We have and can continue to learn from other cities to ensure that changes are successful and achieve our goals, and make a difference in the lives of Calgarians and inspire other cities. Change is hard, and it's even harder in a crisis. Not everything is going to go smoothly. But that isn't a reason to not address the crisis. It would be not just irresponsible to kick this problem down the road, but destructive. This crisis is an opportunity to show leadership, an opportunity to demonstrate the compassion and kindness that we became famous for. And we can't do it alone. Municipalities must come together with provincial and federal governments to build a system where every Canadian can have a home that is safe and affordable. We need accountability and support to ensure that these additional homes are actually built, that non-market homes stay that way, that landlords treat people with dignity, that homes aren't just built as cheaply as possible, but are built to last and built for the future, with solar panels, heat pumps, hail-resistant sidings, insulation for extreme weather conditions, and even windows that open. And that funds earned from making these changes goes back into housing. Addressing the housing crisis is going to take hard work from everyone, especially leaders. It is going to be messy, and it will take time. Taking action on the housing crisis now is an opportunity to show that care for our fellow Calgarians didn't end with the flood in 2013, but continues to define Calgary now and into the future.
Thank you, Hanita. David.
Excellent. I feel woefully, perhaps inadequate to be surrounded by the panelists just within my panel and the ones that have gone before me, but be that as it may, here I am. Good afternoon, Chair Penner, members of the committee. My name is David Barrett. I've spoken to most of you before. I'm speaking as a concerned and engaged Calgarian. For what it's worth, I live in a single detached home in an area zoned MCG. This is speaking to the existence of this type of home that will still exist and persevere regardless of what our base residential zone is. I live in the inner city community of Renfrew. My community has some incredible examples of the proposed RCG base zoning. I'd love to take you guys on a tour of some of the hidden density within Renfrew, the fourplexes that probably couldn't be built these days. The areas where they exist are some of the most vibrant parts of our neighborhood. I'm going to try to keep my comments brief. I'm a little bit verbose, and that's okay, but I'll try to keep them as brief as possible so we can hear more diverse voices and perspectives and lived experiences. I do really want to acknowledge and thank those that are sharing their personal experiences associated with housing insecurity. It's something that people should never have to do. I thought we all agreed on that after secondary suites, but here we are. Something that this council has made happen by fumbling the task force recommendations in June. You've made people come and grovel. I like numbers. I wasn't prepared as Nathan, obviously, beforehand, but he knocked it out of the park, I think. As you've heard from other speakers, Calgary is growing exceptionally fast. Our estimates are that we're going to see more than 60 new Calgarians every day, each and every day over the next 4 years. As you've heard from administration this morning, an overwhelming majority of Calgarians are in support of taking action on the housing affordability crisis. Administration, in their roles as subject matter experts, are in favor of taking action on the housing affordability crisis. Experts, like Dr. Goldstein that you heard before, across a variety of fields who convened as part of the Housing Affordability Task Force, are in favor of taking action on the Housing Affordability Task Force recommendations. Nonprofit leaders doing some of the most critical work supporting Calgarians that are in need are in support of this. The majority of public submissions and the groundswell of support from the expert recommendations put forward is inspiring. This is something that I have not actually felt in a while at a public hearing, and I come to more than, I'm privileged, I can come to these a lot. This is different. This discussion, as someone already mentioned in my panel, this is different, right? We've seen people taking time out of their jobs, out of their livelihoods, making time because this is such a critical discussion to be having, all right? We've seen students. We never see undergraduate students. I'm teaching a whole whackload of undergraduate students at the university. I have never seen them as engaged as on housing. This is critical. They're spending, I'm digressing from my notes and my time's gonna run out. That's okay. They're spending more and more time concerned about where they're going to live, how they can afford to live, than the content that I'm trying to teach them. This is not the usual crowd that attends public hearings, right? We might see some of that still, but you know what? I think this is incredible. I want everybody to reflect on this. Who is here? Who are you hearing from? Who do you usually hear at these public hearings? I'm running out of time, but to date, the main lever the council has had to address housing affordability has been greenfield growth. And my goodness, have we been good at that, right? This is not financially or environmentally sustainable. We know this. Nathan showed us the graphs already. Our increasing infrastructure deficit, our liabilities are mounting because we keep growing at the outside of Calgary. We need to focus in. I understand why greenfield growth has been, approved hand over fist. I don't agree with it, but that's the only lever that we've had. This is a result, again, of restrictive and exclusionary zoning processes, ridiculous parking requirements, and other administrative hurdles. It's a key piece of addressing housing affordability as we go forward, but it can't be the only lever that we're pulling on. I'm going to try to wrap up here. We have an opportunity here to be bold, to reduce red tape, to take meaningful action on housing affordability and have huge impacts on the lives of current and future Calgarians. Please think hard about the consequences of your actions or, as others have brought up, non-actions. Don't throw out access to substantial federal funding to appease your vocal, exclusionary, and non-representative community associations.
Thank you, David.
Community character. It's not made up of houses, it's people.
Thank you, David. I have a question for all of you. So you can each come up one at a time. There's no other questions in the queue, and then we'll see. You all come from very different neighborhoods, and I think that's really great. It's a great mixed panel, and so maybe you could all answer for me what a defining feature or what a defining character of your neighborhood is in a quick sentence. And take it whatever order you want.
I heard ice cream mentioned. I mean, I live right by my favorite ice cream shop, and I think the defining feature is going after dinner with my daughter for ice cream. She's not quite old enough yet, and seeing just the amount of people that are there, from all walks of life, all incomes even, and seeing that the neighborhood that I live in is generating that kind of traffic to this business and also causing people to interact that would otherwise not interact. It's the same thing I love about transit, people interacting that wouldn't otherwise interact.
So I live in Banff Trail, and I would say that the defining characteristic of my neighborhood is incongruity between the fact that we are one of the most strategically located neighborhoods in the city. We are proximate to amenities, we are proximate to employment nodes, we are proximate to wonderful educational institutions from kindergarten through grade 12, and then close to U of C and Sept. And yet we are a restrictive covenant community. We have hundreds of units of housing unbuilt because of restrictive covenant litigation, because some people in my community are so committed to exclusionary zoning.
So I live in Kelvin Grove, and the defining character of our community, I'm going to say, is people, but I like the walkability and the location, so my kids have always walked to all 3 levels of school, and then the bus is right there, and it's an older neighborhood that has trees and is easily accessible to downtown and all of that kind of thing. And so I just think, as I said in my little bit, was that this is a community that is loved by so many people, and so there's always room, as there always is with love, where you can always include more. So that's my bit.
I already kind of talked about the character of Bayland Heights. We kind of have a shopping center at like right in the middle of the neighborhood, which is really awesome. And of course, I argued that that could only really exist in a situation where you have the critical mass of patronage around. I think it's really, we have a huge parking lot, but I think it's fantastic that almost like 75% of it, if I had to guess, I haven't done the data, goes completely unused because so many people live within walking distance of this place that, the pedestrian traffic around that shopping center is almost kind of what you'd expect in a really, really vibrant main street. And I want people to know that, I think it was Nathan said that, our nodes and corridors account for only 13% of land. This is not something that we need to kind of throw up our hands and give up. Like, vibrance is something that can exist in every single community if we allow it to.
I promised that Chair Penner didn't know what my last quip was going to be as my time was out. Community character is not built form. Somebody saying that their community being single detached, and that's the character of the community, is hogswash. Okay? Community character is defined by the people that live there. We want to be able to walk to the ice cream store, to the coffee shop. You need that critical mass. You need the people there. The best part about my community of Renfrew is the people that I know. It's not if you live in a single detached, a row home, or a condo. It's the people. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. I really appreciate that. Committee, it is 3:21. I think to keep us on time, we're going to take a 15-minute break, so that will put us back here at 3:36. See you then.